Well, hello there. Um, Welcome to this lovely little video here. My name is Duncan, or possibly Jeff Vader, if you know my handle. But you probably don't know me at all because I've never really done a video like this. Um, I'm a pretty big fan of Game of Thrones, or rather, it'd be more accurate to say that I was a Game of Thrones fan. Like most Game of Thrones fans. Most of us are former fans. Um, and I'm currently a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, the book series upon which said series is based. And I just recently finished my second go through on the audiobooks recently. And I thought, it would be kind of fun to just rate the POV chapter characters on a classic little tier list here. There's a couple of these out here. They're all slightly different. This one looks fine. Seems to have all the characters that I can think of. Just classic D to S tier. Because people have really divisive opinions on, who the good characters are, who the bad characters are. Some people like certain chapters more than others. And I just thought, I'd throw in my little contribution to the discourse. Just to have something out. I haven't prepared any of this. I haven't scripted any of this. I've just thought about it in my head, and I'm just going to kind of riff as I go. And I'll just kind of go through them in the order that they're listed here, which doesn't appear to be. I guess this is like. I guess this is like an order of appearance. Or is that right? Because Eddard Stark, he's not the first POV, is he? I don't think so. I think isn't Bran start us off? Whatever order this is, if it's in any order at all, I'm just gonna do it from left to right here. So let's start off with a classic. Good old Eddard Stark, Ned Stark himself, seen being in the TVC. Um, I think that it's a pretty uncontroversial opinion to go ahead and throw old Lord Stark right up somewhere between A and S. Um, it's hard to say for sure whether he's definitely, if he's not an S tier, he is absolutely top of A tier. I don't think that if he's not S tier, I don't think anyone can beat him in A tier. I'm gonna rate them. The way I'm gonna do it is I'm gonna do obviously top to bottom tier wise, but I'm also gonna do within the tiers themselves. Left to right is like better and worse. So it'll be sort of like pyramid shaped in terms of what I think is better and worse, roughly. It's not going to look like an actual pyramid because it's not going to be that symmetrical. Um, it's tough, It's short and sweet. The story of Eddard Stark. He has more chapters in A Game of Thrones, which is the only book he appears in, than some characters who have been around since A Game of Thrones. They were just weren't POV characters. And yet, overall, compared to some of the main characters like Tyrion and Jon and Bran and so on and so forth, he does have, on average, considerably fewer uh, chapters. So you don't really get to spend as much time knowing him. But the one thing that he has going for him is that he does have a lot. A lot of people talk about Eddard Stark even after he's dead. He's a very prominent supporting character even in death because his story is really the catalyst for the whole thing. Like the Song of Ice and Fire essentially begins with the beheading of Eddard Stark. It's essentially you could see it that way. One thing I should specify before I go forward here is that I will only be taking into account chapters which are in existing printed books of the Song of Ice and Fire. I actually said that correctly, and I stopped myself. A Song of Ice and Fire series. So from Game of Thrones to A Dance with Dragons. None of the sneak preview chapters that have been released online and leaked online, I will not be taking any of those into account because if I did, I'm pretty sure what's his face here? Where is he? Aaron? I'm pretty sure he'd be like way up here. He's not. Aaron is pretty good. He's definitely gonna do okay, but The Forsaken by itself is like right there, like probably the best chapter in the whole series. But I'm not going to take that into account. I am discounting that because any unreleased chapters of any book that may or may not exist can always be changed. We don't know if it's final. It's not fair. Um, so that's how it's going to be. Anyway, back to Eddard Stark. It's a real tough choice because Eddard Stark is a really interesting character. He's a strong, firm moral compass. He's very much the protagonist of the first book, and it's done intentionally because you expect based on how you know things how stories are supposed to go, that the hero, the noble, honorable hero, is supposed to face some shit, get some dirt in his eye, and suffer for a little while, but eventually, he makes a comeback in the end, and sets the world right, and becomes awesome in the end. And that's not how Eddard Stark's story goes, as it turns out. Turns out, shit just keeps getting worse for him, and until he has to die. And that's a really interesting. I mean, I'm not. This isn't exactly like a hot take or anything. It's a 30-year-old hot take. This shit is stone cold. It is like as petrified as Danny's eggs. Like they're like the whole plot twist of Eddard Stark getting his head chopped off at the end of Game of Thrones is a pretty wild plot twist. He is really one of the only. Most of our POV characters don't die. Like, you have a few do. One coming up worth talking about. That definitely is a thing that happens. But most of them, they make it. You don't really see that happen very much. This is how you interact with the story, and all of a sudden, they're just gone. And plus, this idea of like the one honorable noble person in all of King's Landing, where he's surrounded by schemers and liars and turncoats and selfish, horrible people. He's like the one good dude there, and he has no idea who to trust or how to trust any of these people, because he just sees them all as duplicitous and conniving and manipulative. Even like Littlefinger, who is sort of like the person he kind of trusts the most for a while, you know, which ends up costing him his life, of course. Even him, he's like super, like he wouldn't trust him as far as as he could throw him. And granted, Littlefinger's not a big dude, and Eddard Stark could probably toss him a couple of feet, but that's still not pretty. That's still not very far as far as allies go. He ends up trusting him mostly because he doesn't really have any other choice, and because his wife trusts him, which we all know how that works out. Uh, and it's interesting trying to watch him like untangle the whole mystery of Robert's bastards, and the whole story, and the whole plot twist of the the Baratheon children, the royal princes and the princess, and how they're actually incest babies. It's interesting because it's like, how do you present like a forensic mystery story through the POV of a medieval fantasy lord? It's like you can't like it's not like you can take like a DNA sample to like a bio lab somewhere and be like, yep, this is Robert Baratheon blood, or oh, this is Cersei Lannister blood. You know, you kind of got to do something a little bit more creative that is like solid enough that you can be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, while also kind of acknowledging the fact that you can never be like 100% sure, because they don't know how like DNA works in fantasy world. So it's like this is like establishing like there's thousands of years of Baratheons with black hair and blue eyes, and all of a sudden he's got these three blonde children. It's kind of like, okay, now I'm clicking. I'm understanding what's going on here. The seed is strong. And Eddard Stark is a really interesting character too, because even though he serves as our sort of moral grounding point, sort of our moral compass for the first part of the story, it's interesting to go back retrospectively, especially from the POV from Jaime Lannister, more so than probably any other character, to go back and see like how this honorable and noble and very like sort of proud, but not in like an arrogant way, sort of proud in the sense of like he really um, holds upholds honor to be like a really important thing to him, and he's really almost borderline snobby about it. Um, and you go back and you see how that sense of like, you know, rigid code of honor really negatively affects certain characters who end up in these like really morally complicated situations where there isn't really a clear answer as to what you should or should not do, or what the right thing is. And Jamie Lannister, obviously, he's kind of a prick, but at the same time, the whole thing about killing Ares is like that was the right thing to do. It may not have been the honorable thing to do. It certainly wasn't the lawful thing to do, but it was ultimately for in everyone's best interest that he did that. Yet he gets shit on it, and Eddard Stark is the man who puts him down essentially. And that's another interesting thing too. They don't really get in a lot of stories where a certain character who's established as like the nexus of what is good and honorable and right is sort of like recontextualized in the sense of like, yeah, maybe he wasn't all that right. Like he was a good person, but like maybe he had some bad ideas. Maybe he was flawed in certain ways that you would not expect to have considered a flaw at the time when you first read through it. So I think that the level of complexity and intrigue that they're able to pack into a relatively brief story for Eddard, I think that might actually push it up. I think that actually is going to go to S tier. I don't want to, it's weird to have like the very first one be up that high, and I'm definitely not going to put like everyone up there. There's definitely only going to be a lot of space to put some people down here. But I really do think they get you off they start you off on a good foot with this show and this series. So next up, we're gonna get to Catelyn Stark. Catelyn is interesting. So this is an interesting character because he's one of the few instances where like George R. R. Martin himself agrees that he kind of like he's not even 100% sure if he did the right thing. Catelyn Stark is essentially the character through whom we experience, by and large, the story of Robb Stark. We get a little bit of him through Bran, but predominantly we get his story through Catelyn. And George R. R. Martin has come out and said in the past that he's like, it's like, I kind of wonder if maybe I should have given Robb a few chapters of his own. It's kind of weird that, this character who's like, it's sort of like the pseudo protagonist of like 1.5 books ends up not getting any of his own POV chapters. Like arguably he's as major, if not more so, a character as Ned himself in the way that he affects the story and affects the political landscape of the remainder of the series. And he never got his own POVs. But then, there's the counter argument of like, well, there are certain decisions and certain instances in which the surprise or the shock of like what Robb ends up doing or how Robb responds to a certain situation is integral to the way it comes out, like the way the way it impacts the story. And there is that argument to be made. Like it would be weird to like be there when Robb, gets married to Jane Westerling, because the surprise of him coming back and being like, hey, by the way, I'm married and I might be having a kid soon, and also this like tiny ass house from the Westerlands is on our team now. I just kind of ruined everything also at the same time. Just BT dubs. And kind of, but a lot of that has to do with Robb himself. It's not so much saying about Catelyn. I mean, part of this is, I'm not so much rating the characters themselves, although the characters are obviously an integral part of how the POVs work out, or how good they are. But it is also about the chapters themselves and about the kind of stories that you get from them, because there are instances where the character themselves is a good character that I enjoy, but maybe their chapters are not the most interesting thing in the universe. we'll get to those later. So what's Catelyn got going for herself? She is very much the if Eddard Stark is like the epitome of the compass of honor and goodness and morality within the Song of Ice and Fire series. Catelyn is very much like the manifestation and sort of the personification of like the misery, the sort of the dread and sorrow and pain and suffering of the series. She is like one of the most victimized characters maybe of all time, watching her husband and her children, her her father, her even to a to an extent her sister, even though she doesn't actually die. All these people that she loves and cares about die or become consumed by their emotions and consumed by this war over time. And she's just sort of this passive character who has really no choice but to watch it all happen. You know, she tries her best to give Rob advice and give her brother advice and, just try to mitigate and mediate as much as possible. But inevitably, dudes got to be dudes. Dudes got to kill each other. And, and it's hard. There's some pretty hard to get through chapters for Catelyn, and not in like the boring like this is a slog sense, but just sort of like fuck, this is like just depressing sense, and that's obviously intentional. George R. R. Martin has gone to great lengths to explain that like pain. How does he say it? It's essentially he talks about how like you should feel pain, you should feel sadness when beloved characters die, because death is painful. When if you're someone who has experienced death in your life, and you know what it's like to lose a parent or a brother or a child, it's just like it's an overwhelming sense of grief, and it's not something to be taken lightly. And he tries his best to convey these feelings as authentically as possible in these stories, and I don't think you really feel it as much through any character as you do through Catelyn. Catelyn herself, some people have issues with. Some people think that she's not a particularly nice character. A lot of people point to her treatment of Jon Snow as like an example of like a really serious flaw, and I mean it is a character flaw. Like it's undeniably, that's kind of the point. Her treatment of Jon Snow it's irrational. She knows it's irrational. She it's he represents the one and only time that her loving husband has ever betrayed her and been deceptive with her. And from her POV, it's just kind of like she doesn't want to accept him as part of the family, because he's the one part of the Stark heritage that's it's got nothing to do with her. Like she's not married to him. She's not a good she's not like a step relative to him. He's not her kid. He's just some from her perspective, he's just some kid that that his father brought home. It's like, yeah, no, I mean, what can you do, right? Like it's an irrational emotion. It's hard to falter for that. Um so how do I rate her? Her chapters are, like I said, I feel like her chapters are important because so much important stuff happens through her POV and around her. She doesn't really do a whole lot herself. She tries, but she doesn't really get a whole lot done herself. She's mostly just the observer. In a way, she's almost like she's like functionally speaking, she's not that different from like Area Hota. His name is hard. Um, except she just has a lot more chapters dedicated to her, and she's slightly more proactive. Um, but a lot happens in her chapters, and I do think that it's hard to rate her any lower than like I'd say B at least. I'll go with B. I think because the thing about her is that it's very much sort of like every Catelyn chapter is more of an exposition dump than like a matter of story progression, with the exception of like the Red Wedding, which is like the most important thing that ever happens, which is again the chapter that is a Catelyn chapter. That is we experience that story through her eyes. That could burn up to A, honestly. Now that I think about it, but I'll finish my thought before I change my mind. It really is just kind of like whenever it's a Catelyn chapter, it's more of like a this is what's happening in the world of the North and the Riverlands, as opposed to like we're doing something. We're getting into a fight today. We're conquering a city. We're killing a dude. We're escaping from imprisonment. We're doing XYZ. You're never doing anything during a Catelyn chapter. Things are just kind of happening around you, and you're just kind of learning about it. And again, the Red Wedding, I don't know. Is that enough to put it in A? It is kind of, like I say, it is like the most important thing. It's really hard to argue against that. Um, Nah, I think I'm actually gonna stick to B, even though the Red Wedding is in there. I think B is fair. Upper B. I think it's probably gonna stay high. So now we gotta talk about Daenerys Targaryen, who is definitely a controversial character. She definitely has fans and detractors. More so if you watch the show. But even the books, she's kind of difficult to rate because one of the things with Daenerys is that she's like very much she's a very like inflammatory character. She's a very short tempered. At the same time, it's like you can't, because you can't really blame her. You know, went through a whole lot of abuse as a child through her brother. There's the genetic element of her father was the craziest person who ever lived, which definitely doesn't help. She sees herself as this very like self-righteous, like I'm gonna free the slaves, I'm gonna save people from getting raped and killed and murdered. But she doesn't really have a very well developed sense of like how to fix all the problems that exist in the world. She's just like slavery bad, ban slavery. Okay, well now what do you do? Like you have so many people, so many thousands of slaves who are kind of like actually sort of chill with being being enslaved. You have an entire economic system built up over thousands of years that was dependent on slavery. So now like people have no idea how the economy works anymore. And that's not like those are not like points against her necessarily. Like it's not a good thing to have slaves who are chill with being slaves, and it's not a good thing to have an economic system based on slavery. The point is they exist. Those things are indisputable elements that exist within the world, and without really any due consideration as to how to deal with that, she just kind of walks up and burns everything to the ground and just kind of refuses to elaborate and just kind of walks away. And you can see her dispensing like very uneven and like not well thought out examples of justice and compensation throughout her reign, in Marine in particular. And it's interesting because it's like some people might say like, well, that's to be expected. She's like 15 years old. She would make a lot of mistakes and fuck up a lot. On the other hand, it's kind of like, man, she really should listen to like her advisors more, because there's a real tendency to just kind of it's like, I need your advice. Everything is difficult and hard, and I don't know what I'm doing. And then they say like, okay, well, here's what you should do. And then she goes, go fuck yourself. I'm gonna do my own thing. Not in so many words, but a lot of times that does kind of it is kind of how it boils down. And it's hard sometimes. It's hard to root for a character who is so arrogant. Um, as for like the chapters themselves, Danny chapters are really hit and miss. There are some like great Daenerys Targaryen chapters, like some of the best chapters ever in this series are Danny chapters. The last chapter of Danny in Game of Thrones is amazing. The whole, it's just like the birth of the dragons and just how like awesome and magical and horrifying and crazy that whole experience is really well told within the novel. There are lots, then there's the whole like desert saga, which is boring as hell. Karth is boring as hell. Aside from like the House of the Undying, which is another like really great chapter, like it's really like magical and creepy and fucked up, and there's a lot of spooky stuff going on in there that continues to be super relevant today. She's constantly thinking about the House of the Undying and the things that she saw there and that she was told were going to happen there. There's a lot of fodder for theories and and such and so forth going on in the House of the Undying. That's a pretty cool chapter. But Karth itself is extremely boring. Zara Zoandaxis is not a particularly compelling supporting character. She leaves there and she goes to Astapor, which she burns to the ground and steals her Unsullied. That's kind of fun. That was a pretty cool chapter too. Her, the way she deals with Yunkai by manipulating the mercenaries and basically tricking them into taking her side. That's all pretty great. And then you get to Marine, and everything kind of grinds to a halt when you get to Marine. It doesn't really matter whether you're talking about the TV show or the books. Marine is just kind of a, a boring slog. It's not particularly compelling, and there are a lot of times where I'm just kind of like, all right, we're doing another Marine chapter. Honestly, I think like the best thing that George ever did for Danny's story when it came to Marine was not giving her any POV chapters in A Feast for Crows, because man, if we had like a whole extra book of just nothing happening in A Feast for Crows, I don't know. I would have sat through it. Feast for Crows can be brutal at times. That could be a pretty brutal book sometimes. So yeah, it's like this is just such a very uneven and asymmetrical distribution of chapters. Some of the best and some of the most boring chapters of all time are told through Danny, and I don't really know where to put her. Is B average here? It's probably not C. Like C seems too low. There's so much good stuff going on for it to be C, but it's a B, and I don't think it's a better than Catelyn B. I think it's less than Catelyn. I think that's where it's going to end up. I think that is where this averages out. Um, Tyrion's S tier, so we're just going to go ahead and actually go ahead and put that. Yeah, Tyrion's pretty top tier. I don't think there's really... Tyrion might have the best chapters overall, like just on average. Tyrion Lannister is just an inherently entertaining character. In every sense of the word. Not only are his chapters really engaging because they're so proactive and there's always something like happening in most of his chapters, but just the way he thinks, the jokes that he tells, the clever lines of dialogue that George weaves into every line and every internal monologue he has. Like Tyrion is just such an interesting and fun and entertaining character. It's hard not to get excited when there's a Tyrion chapter, even when he's going through his like really dark emo phase during Dance with Dragons. which could, will probably continue into the next two books because he's definitely not going back, not anytime soon. Uh, Even then, he's just such a compelling and witty character. I'm running out of words to describe him, but you know, the the idea that it's like he's very much his father's son in ways that neither of them were really willing to come to terms with until the very end when he ends up shooting his father with a crossbow. Uh, he has these issues related to uh, you know women and being loved and accepted by society, and Tywin's pretty fucked up too in his own way. He has issues. He's got daddy issues. He's got mom issues, issues with women. He's got all these hang-ups. But unlike Tyrion, who kind of leans into the cast, Tywin is very much like, oh, I would never do any of that. I'm so prim and proper. I shit gold, blah, blah, blah. And Tyrion just kind of leans into it, full on Joker style. It's like, yeah, the world is shit. Everyone's stupid and I hate them and it doesn't fucking matter. So fuck it. I'll just do whatever I want. Of course, that ends up biting him in the ass because, that whole attitude ends up getting him, you know, shit on it during his trial. Um, is there anything else to say about Tyrion Lannister? Um, just the way he is able to like win people over to his side and and get people to like him that definitely shouldn't like him, and the way he pisses off characters that he really shouldn't piss off. You know, like I say, he's just a really great, fun character. There's not much else to say about it. Um, Maximum hype for Tyrion. I hope he goes on to do great things in future books. Jon Snow's pretty great too. I know that's like super basic and like boring almost because he's like such a paragon of like good and honor, kind of like his dad or his father. We all know he's not really his dad, but like kind of in that same vein of like he's really like inflexible until he can't afford to not be, and you would think that's like a really boring character to play, but at the same time it's like Jon Snow is actually like surprisingly complex and interesting at the same time. You know, his whole like struggle with like trying to convince the Night's Watch to accept the wildlings uh for this just for the sake of the greater good, the life of all, the better interest of all living things, and just this thousands of years of prejudice he has to sort of break through at every turn. And it's just like you get where the Night's Watch is coming from. Like they've been not forget the prejudice. I mean, a lot of these people have been fighting the wildlings directly for a long time. It's like they've lost friends and relatives, and some of them have lost bits of their bodies to wildlings over the years. It's like it's not an easy thing to just get over it, but it's absolutely necessary. And Jon is there for that. And seeing him having to struggle between like, it's like he could have gone south and fought with his brother. He could have accepted Stannis's his offer of lordship for Winterfell, married a hot wife, and become a Stark, which is what he always wanted. And and to have it like to turn that down because it's like he just feels like that's just not what his job is. What his, that would just be another way of sacrificing his honor Uh, it's just it's always it's what do they say, the heart in conflict with itself is the only thing worth writing about. It's a cheesy line. It's overused for sure, even especially by George himself. But John is right. It definitely epitomizes that in the sense of like he is constantly doubting himself. He constantly does not believe that what he's doing is like he's constantly not sure if what he's doing is the right thing. But at the same time, it's like he's got to make a decision. He's got to make it now. So here's where we are. So yeah, Jon Snow's pretty hype. I'll put him up there. So let's talk about why Bran Stark is a D tier. Bran Stark's chapters are some of the most boring things that I think have ever been written. Um, they're like there's like 20 chapters of Bran's story that are just Bran is walking to a place that he needs to go to do a thing, and it's not particularly compelling or fun. There are some entertaining chapters with Bran in it. I'm trying to think of like I like the one story about his vision where he first meets the three-eyed crow, and he learns how to fly and open his third eye and all that bit jazz. Like that's fun. That's kind of a cool chapter. Really, acts as sort of a catalyst for a major plot element in A Song of Ice and Fire. But like a lot of stuff that happens in Brad chapters is just an 8-year old is dealing with the fact that he has no legs and he must walk, which is like, yeah, it's sad, but at the same time it's like, can we just get on to like a Tyrion chapter or like a John chapter, you know? Like, can we just move it along? Can we just get to the wall and get to the north and find the three-eyed crow and just kind of get on with it, you know? You know, yeah, Bran is boring. I'm not. I think he's going to get more interesting later now that he's actually with the Three-Eyed Crow and some crazy shit's happening. Because the Three-Eyed Crow is a very interesting character, a very scary, creepy, fucked up character. And I imagine that there's going to be some cool stuff going on with him pretty soon. But as far as like what's out so far, yikes! You could skip like almost all the brand stuff and just take a Wikipedia summary, and it would be just as engaging and just as informative. Sansa Stark is kind of similar to Bran, but a little bit better in my eyes. Like, it's almost hard. It's kind of weird to talk about how like the story of Sansa's like abuse and captivity in King's Landing is like a more entertaining story because it's like fuck, that's kind of not a nice thing to say, but at the same time it's like it is like it's at least it's something like it's something is happening, people are having thoughts and things are being done to other people. You get to see a lot of like the psychology of the Hound through her. uh you learn how you learn about how she basically fucked over her father by spilling the beans about his plans to rebel, or suggested that might be something he might be doing to Cersei. And that's kind of fucked up when you think about it. Like the fact that she's not even like remotely aware that happened. It's like that's pretty fucked up. Um, it does get to a point though, after you escape from Joffrey, you do kind of think like, oh right, Sansa's out of there. Maybe something, maybe she can get a chance to do something proactive and cool and be a part of the story and no longer have to be the sufferer. And then she has to deal with her aunt, who's also really fucked up. Now there's obviously some pretty interesting stuff going on there. Like the idea that it comes out through Sansa Stark's POV that Lysa and Littlefinger are essentially the people who started the whole story. They cooperated to kill the previous hand of the king, Jon Arryn, and because they I get, yeah, the idea, the idea being that then they could get married because that was what she's always wanted. And that's pretty. I mean, that's pretty interesting. That's kind of an interesting plot twist because like you're led to believe for a very long time that one of the Lannisters, either Cersei or Joffrey or whoever, was responsible for that assassination. And it makes sense up until that point because we hate the Lannisters. They're bad people. You know, they're murderers and they would do that kind of thing just to advance their own power. And sort of have it come out that like two like totally innocuous supporting characters would be responsible for that is kind of like, whoa, okay, that's a plot twist. But yeah, it's like a lot of things that happen in Sansa's story are like she just doesn't really have anything really to do or say about it. She's not a particularly, again, she's not a proactive character. And while I think her chapters are a lot more interesting than Bran's chapters, there's just not a whole lot to go off of. I once again kind of like Bran. I think that a lot more interesting things are going to happen in her story in later books because there's a whole plot through Littlefinger to essentially place her as the Lady of Winterfell and have her married to the future Lord of the Eyrie, and that'll be interesting. That'll be kind of an interesting plot bit to unfurl. But for now, that's not really happened, and all we have to go off of is some interesting chapters, but overall just kind of bland. So I think C is appropriate for Sansa. Yeah. So here's the thing. Remember left to right. Arya Stark is not particularly fun to read about. Her best chapters are in like the first like couple of books. I think I can say with confidence that almost every chapter that Arya Stark has after like the starting from like the moment that Sandor Clegane kills Beric Dondarrion from then onward is just not fun at all. I don't. There are so many Arya chapters that I'm just kind of like, oh, for fuck's sake, can I just skip this? Especially the second time around when I know what's coming and I know how little is happening and how little any of this really like matters plot wise. I'm just kind of like, another Arya chapter. She's gonna be in Bravo. She's working for that. She's scrubbing dead bodies and she says she's no one, and the guy says she's someone, and it's just like, it's one of those things where it's like, just get on with it. Like, I really wished that after she went to Bravos, that they just kind of like stopped having Arya Stark chapters for like a long time, like 3 books even, so that when she comes back, it's like, oh, she's like a really different character now. It's like, I know the idea is like you want to give her like some context and some perspective on like all the shit that she's doing and all the things that happen that make her who she is, but like you probably could work that in with some dialogue, maybe some POV chapters, some internal monologue from like a future book. Like we're talking like Winds of Winter kind of thing. But just a lot of that stuff that happens in the later books is super skippable chapters. Theon Greyjoy. Theon Greyjoy is another really interesting character with some pretty wild POVs. Some of them. Excuse me. The Greyjoys are interesting because like we almost have as many Greyjoy chapters as we have, or Greyjoy POVs, I should say, as we have Stark POVs. Because we got Theon Greyjoy, we've got Victorian Greyjoy, Asha Greyjoy, and we got Aeron Greyjoy. It's like, was that one, two, three? We get four different POVs from Greyjoys, and one, two, three, four, five. So five plus Jon Snow, so 5.5 Stark POVs. Uh, so yeah, they're a really major house. They got a lot of shit going on. I really enjoy the Ironborn as like a faction. I think they have like a really cool. I like how different their society is from the rest of Westeros. You know, like they're very like it's a very harsh and like cutthroat society. You know, the island is so the Iron Islands are just like barren and cold and damp and unforgiving, and everyone there is an asshole and hates each other, and is just a murderous asshole. And I kind of like it. I like how different their culture and their religion is, and having that POV through Theon, where like you see his whole world come apart because he's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna come home and be this cool Greyjoy successor, and I'm gonna be the prince of what's it called, Prince of Winterfell, the prince of the king of the Iron Islands, etc., etc. And everyone there is just kind of like, no, that ain't how that shit works, dog. Just the absolute level of like disrespect he gets for having been raised by, the Starks, and all dressed up in clothes that he bought with gold, and it's just all that jazz. It's just kind of like it really sheds a light on like just the like arrogance and entitlement that he feels, that is just completely shut down by like the least entitled faction in the entire like story. On top of that, later Theon chapters, you see just like how fucked up his mental state is, where like he feels as though like the only way to earn his place in the world is capturing Winterfell and winning all these great victories. And it's like it's tough because it's like, yes, he does some really fucked up stuff, like he murdered two innocent peasants and a bunch of other innocent non-peasants. He's a very like just does a lot of really terrible manipulative things, and at the same time it's like you kind of help you feel a little bit of sympathy for him, just in the sense of yeah, like what else is he gonna do, like you know you really feel that like mental trap of like he didn't really like he had a choice, but like you can understand why he felt as though he didn't have a choice. And then there's the whole Reek saga, and you see just how like really you learn how terrible and of a person Ramsay Bolton is through the Reek chapters and the later Theon chapters, and just describing like his just like maimed body and his distressed psychological state as a result of the torture he went through. It's just kind of like, ugh. It's one of those things where it's like, you don't really get a whole lot of like proactive Theon after he gets captured. So there are elements of kind of like, yeah, I kind of want to just get on with it, but at the same time you also get a lot of insight it's kind of similar to Catelyn, actually. You kind of get a lot of insight into the politics of like the post Red Wedding North under the Bolton rule through Theon, and a lot of important stuff goes on there. So there is definitely a lot of value to Theon chapters, and I'm excited for him to do more stuff. This whole like chase scene that he's enacted with what's her face, Jane Poole, and the wildlings. I'm excited to see how that comes out because, we got the pink letter right from the John chapter at the very end that says, "Oh yeah, everyone's fucking dead and captured and in a cage." Blah blah blah. And the implication that is that Theon's made off with Jane Poole. Like, we're not really 100% sure what's going on. Like, I guess he got away, I guess, because he says he wants his wife back. He wants his reek back. So he got away, but it's a long way to go from Winterfell to Stannis and the Wall beyond. So yeah, I'm interested to see what happens with Theon. I want to see him get back into a more proactive role. But even still, I think that where he stands, A, is pretty fair. Oh my god, I've been doing this for an hour, and I've done like a third of the characters. Okay, Davos Seaworth, A tier. No, that's B. That's an A tier. Davos Seaworth is one of my favorite characters. I love that he just has this like absolute ideal of like, I'm going to serve Stannis Baratheon, but not exclusively to like the word, the absolute letter of his law. He considers Stannis to be like the best choice for king. He sees him as righteous and fair and just, and he wants him to succeed, but at the same time he recognizes his flaws. He recognizes that he doesn't always have the best advisors and the best advice around him. And so even when he's not like directly obeying or even directly disobeying things that Stannis does, he is always acting in his best interests, and in what he believes that the greater interests of the realm are. And in a way, he's almost like a more good person. Like Davos is probably like one of like the most good people like in the whole series, and it's kind of refreshing to see that kind of attitude of just like, this has to be done. Like, all the other kings of the Westeros are just kind of fucking over each other for castles and patches of dirt, and meanwhile we have this like literal existential crisis happening in the north, and if we don't do something about that, like everyone is going to die. And so you gotta give Dev some props. He's got some major balls to do what he does and say what he says. He's just such a very honest and likable guy. You really just want things to work out for him. He's just a great guy to root for. I love old Davos, and I want better things from him. I'm putting him right at the top of A tier. I think he might be like the gatekeeper for A tier. I think. Well, here we are. Here we are at last, looking like some kind of Greek statue in this particular art style. Jaime Lannister himself, right there. Probably my favorite character in the whole book, in the whole series. As a supporting character, as a POV character, Jaime Lannister, cream of the crop. Just an absolutely fantastically written character. Enough said. Taking this, he's sort of like the very much the inverse of Eddard Stark in the sense that he is just like one of, if not the most duplicitous and despicable and vile, vulgar people that you can imagine. He's he's a dishonorable turncloak. He's rude and arrogant and self-centered. He fucks his sister, which totally destabilizes the whole, the realm. and the word of law and basic morality. He's a would-be child murderer. If only Bran didn't have a really, really sturdy spine and skull. Thank God for the thyroid crow. He probably had to played a role in that. Um, and like just the most despicable person you can think of, And he has that line about how, the only reason he didn't kill Robb Stark is because he got his sword stuck in somebody's skull. It's like, fuck, dude. Like, this guy is ruthless. And you never could possibly see yourself, like, rooting for this character. Just like you would never doubt the integrity of a character like, Ned Stark. And then, starting in Storm of Swords, the best book, by the way. Book 3 is the best book. IMO. At me. Starting in Storm of Swords, you start to see from his POV, like, how he views the other characters, and some of it is just prejudicial. Like, he doesn't like Brienne of Tarth because, she's stiff and, unsociable and ugly, and, she's a woman and all that. There's a lot of, like, just outright prejudice going on in how he feels about her. But then you start to get sort of like to the root of the issue with him, and the real reason why he dislikes all these characters. Like, it really bothers him when people call him Kingslayer, and you realize, like, the best thing he ever did in his life, the most altruistic, least selfish, most, like, good thing he ever did is, like, the thing that everyone hates him for the most. You know, people look at him as, like, he's a Kingsguard who killed his king, so obviously he's, not trustworthy. No one ever really pays attention to the fact that it's like, yeah, he killed, like, the most evil dude ever. He wasn't supposed to, but, like, he did, and it was probably for the best that he did, because he would have had the entire city nuked and killed, like, 500,000 people if he didn't. You know, and you have that amazing scene, that bathtub scene. Holy fuck, is it good in the show? But it's really good in the book too. The scene where he just spills his guts to Brienne and tells her about everything that was going on in King's Landing during the sack, and how he basically saved everyone from burning to death. And to that end, Eddard Stark looks at him and goes, "Wow, you loser, you betrayed your king. Like, what the fuck? You had one job. You literally had one job." And it's how that completely just changed, the way it was sort of like his Joker moment, where he's just like, fine, you know what? Fuck it. Everyone hates me anyway, so I'll just be an asshole for the rest of my life. Fuck it. I'll never do anything for you people again. And you just have and as he sort of softens and you start to see the better side of him, you see all these lines he has about just how much he just absolutely adores classical knighthood, and how much reverence he has for characters like Arthur Dane and Barristan Selmy and Gerald Hightower and all these other like amazing Kingsguard, these amazing knights that he held in such high regard. And even like Rhaegar Targaryen to an extent, he was kind of buddies with him, and he was like, he just thinks about them, all the time, and he's like, man, when people like them were in charge of things, when they were running things, life is good. And like you just get so much more context for how his character and his morality was sort of not just formed but completely destroyed by his years on the King's Guard. Everything from how he was essentially taken in the Kingsguard as like a bargaining piece for Aerys. He got separated from his sister, who he loved, and there's things to be said about that, of course. uh, and how he basically just spent his entire life, his entire career, with few exceptions, just kind of standing around watching his king murder and burn everyone around him. He raped his wife. He was just the most despicable person ever. He served the most awful king of all time, and you know this idea of like everything he thought knighthood could be, and all these things that he really looked up to and revered were just kind of crumbled to dust around him, and that sort of the straw that broke the camel's back being that confrontation with Eddard Stark, where the one time he became motivated to do the right thing, the one time he finally stood up for what he believed in, even if it was more of like an impulsive, not well thought out plan. It was still motivated by like this isn't right, like this needs like something that got to do something about this. The one time he did that, and he's hated for it. People thought he was all cool and awesome when he was just standing around watching the world burn, and as soon as he tries to do the right thing, he gets shit on. So it's like, why bother? Why bother being a good person if no one's going to appreciate you for it? And through his interactions with Brienne of Tarth, he starts to realize that maybe image isn't important. Like maybe being good for the sake of just for the goodness sake is what being a knight is about. And just because people are gonna throw dirt in your eye and call you names, it's like that's no excuse to be an asshole and to give up. And you just yeah, and their relationship is just so great. I love that they have this like this like weird like frenemy relationship where like they go back and forth calling each other names and alternating between calling them by their bad nicknames and their real names. They alternate between giving them titles of honor and derogatory nicknames. It's just like it's such a great chemistry because they're just so like opposite characters, yet they just have great chemistry on screen and in book, on page. There's just not enough good things you can say about Jaime Lannister and his story. He's just every all the stuff that he's doing in like Feast for Crows, the way he's like breaking up the siege of Riverrun and dealing out justice in the Riverlands without taking up arms against the Tullys, trying to uphold his vows, even to people that can't really call him out for it. It's just so fun. It's so endearing. Like again, it's like you never thought you'd care about what happened to this guy, but it's like you care so much about Jaime Lannister by book 5, and it's amazing. It is a nothing less than a miracle of writing that he came out the way he did. His I think it's his last chapter. It might be actually like the closer of. No, okay. So Feast for Crows. What ended that? It's his last chapter in that one, but I don't know if it's the last chapter in the book or not. I might be misremembering. But when he throws the letter onto the fire, Cersei's letter onto the fire, that is like. I know it's super cringy and whatever to say things like this, but like I literally got like chills when I read that the first time. I was like, wow, what a character development. Finally like breaking free of this like horribly manipulative and abusive relationship and toxic relationship with his sister, and just being like, nah, fuck it, throw that shit in the fire. I ain't got time for that. Amazing, amazing. Jaime Lannister, numero uno, cream of the crop. And this is like when I was like going back and forth between Eddard being like A or S tier. This is why, because like I knew there was gonna be a handful of these guys up here, and I didn't want it to be like super populated. So it was like, which is why I was kind of like, oh, maybe he's just like a really high A tier. It's like, I don't know. I might. when think about how strongly I feel about Jaime Lannister versus how like neutral good I feel about Eddard Stark, it's like it really makes me kind of want to. I don't even know. Like Davos might even be more interesting than. I don't know. They're kind of pretty close in my eyes. I might actually. I think I'm actually gonna commit. I'm dropping him down. I don't think he's on the same tier as Jaime Lannister or Tyrion. The Lannister brothers, two of the best stories probably in the whole show. Samuel Tarly. Oh my god, another great character. I'm just knocking them out one after the other. Sam's chapters are so good. Like there is some like just riveting things going on with Sam. Like he's such an endearing and likable character. The way he's like, and at times it's like it's almost like pathetic, just how much he complains about, being cold or fat or slow or weak or tired or just incompetent in general. It's like there are points where it's just kind of like, oh my god, I get it. I know whose chapter I'm reading. I know who this is. But at the same time, it's like I feel like it's necessary to emphasize those things in his case because of just the amazing things that he does accomplish and the amazing things that he does end up doing. You know, that whole encounter with the White Walker that kills Small Paul is just like so like tense and it just a thrill. Um, when everything goes to shit on the Fist of the First Men, or the is that what it's called? The Fist, just the Fist. I can't remember what the full name is. Um, Beyond the Wall. It's just like some of the like most intense, scary, and like suspenseful things that go on in the whole series are in Sam chapters, and it's just kind of like you're just there. It's like kind of watching like Shaggy from Scooby Doo, except more so because Shaggy's just gonna run away. But like a lot of times Sam can't. Like he really can't just run away. Like he has to stand his ground, and it's the more you bring him down, the more you talk about how weak and pathetic he is, the more satisfying it is when he does rise to the occasion and kills a White Walker and fights back against the white version of Small Paul. Like that is another just super intense encounter as well when you find out like that the obsidian dagger, or the obsidian dagger that just does nothing to whites. He's like, well shit, I don't know what to do now. And he goes through this, like nearly gets himself killed before he eventually sets the white on fire. And he's all like, oh my god, thank god that's over. Steps outside, immediately there's like 20 whites and they're all about to kill Gilly, and you're just like, this sense of dread comes over you, like fuck, it's over, like they're fucked. And obviously what's his face, Cold Hands pops in and saves their asses, which is like, oh boy, that's convenient timing. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, it's hard to fault it. It's just a lot of great moments with Sam. And when they go to Bravos with Mr. Aemon, there's some great stuff there. Like with I can't remember the bard's name. The one guy who works, the other Night's Watch brother, who's supposed to go into town and like sing and bring in money so that they can buy medicine for Maester Aemon, but he just like spends it on like whores and booze and food and all that and nice clothes and all that. And Sam just like pleading with him, like, please, you were literally the only person that I can rely on. My entire entourage consists of a woman who's grieving for her baby, who's like 1,000 miles away, a dying old man, a baby, and you. You are the only other like adult around. I need you. I literally need you. And he's just kind of like, go fuck yourself, Sam. And the moment when Sam just starts beating the shit out of him, it's just sort of like this very cathartic moment of like all of like that sense of uselessness and dread and misery and frustration that Sam has been building up over like 4 books, and he just lets it all go by just pounding the shit out of this asshole. It's just like, oh, it's so satisfying. And yeah, he like gets dumped in the canal and almost dies immediately. Uh, but hey, you know what? For that one moment, Sam was on top of the world, and you gotta respect that. Um, and yeah, the funeral for Mr. Amen is like one of like the saddest scenes in the whole book. It's probably like one of like the only 2 chapters that actually like made me almost cry, which I know is super lame. Oh my god, so cringe. She cried listening to a book. Listen to a 95-year-old man read a book. Oh my god, so pathetic. That chapter and the one where Ned kills Lady. Yeah, I cried in both of those. I'm a man. I'll admit it. Um, yeah, no, that's rough. Maester Aemon is such a good character. You get a lot of him through Sam and John, and when he dies, it's just you really feel it. You really feel like how much of a loss that is, not just for Sam personally, but like for the world at large, because of just how old and wise and impactful he was. And they definitely don't undersell it for sure. It's a great scene. Um, that's 100% an A tier, very close to S tier. I think. Oh, ooh, is it above? It's above. It's above Davos for sure. Is it above Ned? Oh, I think it might be. I think I'm putting him there. I like a while ago. I said that Davos might be the gatekeeper for A tier, and I've already replaced him twice because I'm very consistent. Again, I didn't plan any of this. Cersei Lannister. There's an aspect of Cersei Lannister. It kind of reminds me of, in a weird way, it's kind of funny to think about. It kind of reminds me of like Tyrion in a way, where she has a lot of like witticisms and like really snide remarks, and there is an aspect of her that's like really entertaining to read and to listen to, in the same way that Tyrion is, because of like just how like just because of the way her mind works. She's very like quick witted in a sense. She's not particularly like brilliant. She makes a lot of mistakes. She can be kind of dumb sometimes. Um, but she does have that sort of like low cunning of like it's like how she can like come up with funny insults for people, and there is an entertaining aspect. And plus, she's just just completely insane. Like Cersei Lannister might be like the most insane person that we ever get like a POV for. Really, like even characters like there's some weirdos like Aaron Greyjoy and Melisandre are kind of weird, but like at least they have justifications for their weirdness. Like Melisandre is not as weird as she lets on. She makes herself seem much more like mysterious and you know captivating than she really is. Aaron is he's just hyper religious, and that's really all he has going for him. Cersei Lannister is completely unstable, and just watching her like paranoia spiral out of control is entertaining in its own way. But that being said, there are some times where I'm just kind of like, yeah, I'm not super into what's going on here. I think she's a good like high end of C. There are times where I was just kind of like, I kind of wish I was listening to something else. But yeah, she's pretty good. I don't mind her. I'm not upset if I get a Cersei chapter, but I'm not like, hell yeah, Cersei chapter. You know what I mean? Let's see. All right. All right. Let's rip off the Band-Aid. We all know where this is going. Brienne of Tarth has the worst chapters in the whole series, hands down. On average, the worst chapters. I don't dislike the character of Brienne of Tarth. I think Brienne of Tarth is a cool character. I think she works fantastically as a supporting character for the stories of for the stories of Catelyn Stark and Jaime Lannister and a few other characters. And I don't think that she like by necessity had to have bad chapters. I don't think there's anything that forced George's hand in making her chapters boring. Like Arya and Bran, you can kind of give them the excuse of like they're children and they can't really do anything on their own. They don't really have a whole lot of agency. Like Arya has a little bit because she's just so willful and well, she has legs for one thing. Uh, um, so yeah, like they're just not really proactive characters because they can't be because that's how children work. Brienne of Tarth is just there are just entire chapters where all she does for the entire chapter, start to finish, is just walk to a place and go to sleep and wake up and keep walking to the place that she was going to yesterday. And at some point, she might run into some NPC that doesn't matter and have a conversation with them that doesn't matter and make a decision about whether or not she wants to keep going in that direction or choose to go in a different direction. And it so does not matter. None of the things that she does are particularly engaging or thrilling or informative or impactful at all. I think the only Brienne chapters that are really like particularly fun or entertaining at all are well, not even fun, like just like chapters that are like good from a storytelling perspective. There's that one where she goes to like that monastery in the Riverlands and she meets that one like priest who's like, like a former soldier, and he kind of has this whole spiel about like, hey, I understand that you see yourself as this like really like noble crusader who's like got a job and got a mission, but like you have to realize that like just traveling across the land and killing people for the sake of honor or law or whatever is like eventually you're just going to die, right? Like you're just gonna fucking die, and no, and you have a father that loves you. You have lands that you stand to inherit if you never have a brother. Like you really can't afford to just go and die. And you may think that your honor is super important, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot when you're just a corpse in the ground. And it has this like really, it's this really like morally challenging moment for her. It kind of makes her think about what she's doing for a moment, and she's like, is this really worth it? And eventually, she does reaffirm herself and she goes off and continues her quest. But it's like, it's a nice little moment, a nice sobering moment to like really take in everything that's going on in the story and all just the horrors of the war. It's a good moment that doesn't last and ultimately doesn't really matter very much. Probably the only other chapter that's particularly interesting is the one where she fights, Rorge and Biter. Yeah, that's pretty all right. Oh well, um, I guess the part where she meets um the Brotherhood without banners is a separate chapter. Yeah, I guess that's a different chapter. I guess that was yeah, that's pretty intense as well. Obviously, that plays a big part of into Jamie's story as well because that's the last thing that he does in a dance is go off with her. So yeah, there's a couple here and there, but like yeah, by and large, Brienne's chapters are just you could literally skip whole chapters and it would accomplish nothing. Like nothing would change. I really think that if you just let her go, if she was written in such a way where she just kind of went off and did her own thing for like, you know, 2 or 3 books, and all of a sudden she's or even just like for like a couple books, and then just she shows up at the end of like A Dance with Dragons, and she's like, Jamie Lannister, you have to come with me. There's something important we gotta tell you. Blah blah blah. it's like, ooh, wow, okay, something interesting is happening. Brienne of Tarth, I didn't think we'd see you again, and then she shows up out of the blue. Like that would be way more like, oh wow, snappy, things are happening, what intrigue? Ooh, it's just boring. Like her chapters are just so boring, and I don't want to listen to them anymore. I just get them out of here. Um, yeah, I think that's about all I need to say about that. Victorian Greyjoy. He's fine, I guess. He has this sort of like ironic entertainment value of like he's just kind of like really dumb and blunt and straightforward. He doesn't really like get witticisms. He doesn't really get when people are making fun of him or whatever. Like he's just kind of he's almost like a less funny version of Drax from the first Guardians of the Galaxy, where he's just very like nothing goes over my head. I would catch it and crush it in my hand. He has this like really fucked up relationship with Euron Greyjoy. How he like Euron like slept with his wife, and all the things that happened after that. And now he wants to steal his wife, aka Dany, and he's somehow convinced that this is absolutely 100% going to work. And he's just so in over his head. He has no clue just how out of his depth he is. The Roy Dotrice in the books for some reason makes him like Australian, which I don't really understand why. But that aside, it's he's all right. There's not really much to go off of. He's only had really a few chapters, and it's kind of more of the same thing every time. He's like, oh, this chapter he's a little closer to Marine, and this chapter he's a little closer to Marine, and this chapter he's a little closer to Marine, and this chapter the red priest tells him something, and he tells him something else, and he tells him something else, and he captures a couple of boats here, captures a boat here, captures these boats. It's really just a lot of like, yeah, we get it. Victorian Greyjoy is getting closer to Daenerys Targaryen and is capturing boats, and that's pretty much it. So like he's not bad. He's just not particularly engaging either. The same can probably be said about Ariane Martell, and I'm gonna put her just above Victorian, I think. Yeah, her whole like, I get it is her POV that we kind of get a first glimpse into. Excuse me, of Doran Martell's grand master plan, which turns out to not be that much of a grand master plan. Spoilers. Uh, yeah, I don't know. She might actually. Now that I think about it, I might actually have to put her down. She's a. I don't really know what to say about her. She's kind of like. It's weird that she is so like insistent on usurping her brother and her father. It's really like the fact that she doesn't even like attempt to confront his father about the secret letter that she found. It's not like she's a particularly like irrational and crazy character like by nature. I mean, I mean, like Doran seems pretty chill. Like he would have probably told her the truth, and I don't know. I just feel like it doesn't do her character much good to have her come right out of the gate as so like untrusting to like probably like the one person that she should probably trust the most. I don't know. Her chapters are kind of weird, and I don't know if I particularly jive with them. I don't know. I can't really like deconstruct it in like a super objective way. I just gut instinct. I'm not really a fan. Asha Greyjoy is okay. She's got some chapters. She does some stuff. Uh, she's kind of an interesting character because she's like one of like the more soft Greyjoys. Like she's still a badass and a fighter, and she's all she's vulgar and cocksure, and she's one of the boys in a way, but she's also like not super into like conquest and raiding in the old way. She's very much like, we should probably like chill out and try to, maybe plant some seeds, build some alliances, you know, try some diplomacy instead of just, rape and pillage all the time. So she's kind of got that fresh. She's got a bit of a fresh perspective there, and I like how she uses like her like bravado and toughness as sort of like a deflection for the fact that she's like clearly really afraid of like commitments and relationships. She's very much like, I just want to be single forever, and she might kind of make a joke out of it, like, fucking yeah, my this is my suckling babe, this is my loving husband, but really like that's all just a cover up for the fact that she's like just not okay with like intimacy and not really okay with like forming close bonds with people. She's just afraid to get attached. And I think that's interesting. There's an interesting layer to that, of that aspect of her psychology. Um, Not a particularly. She ends up being like the only POV character that we've got in the Stannis camp during Dance with Dragons. So really, she is like the only thing keeping us up to date on what's going on there, and it's not a particularly compelling set of chapters, if I'm being honest. It's not terrible. It does kind of emphasize sort of how dire the situation is and how bad, it kind of, it's sort of like whatever like with the opposite of hyping up Stannis's defeat is, whatever the opposite verb there is. Uh, which again, kind of like how talking about how shit Sam is, kind of it makes it more exciting when he kicks ass. How much Stannis' situation is played down makes it more exciting, if and when he eventually wins. And a lot of people have theorized that he probably will win the battle for the North. So that'll be a pretty fun chapter to see in the future. Like I say, she's fine. She's not like amazing or anything. I put her in like low B tier. Eris Oakhart, it's kind of like there's only one chapter with him in it, and I feel like that kind of puts him in like D tier by default. He's not a particularly interesting character. He's just kind of like just this like nice guy, not like a nice guy Tia, but like just a decent person who's caught up in this weird political scheme. He's got the hots for Dora Martell's daughter, and he's like not really sure what he's supposed to do. They're talking about making his princess a queen, and he's like, that doesn't seem like a good idea to me, but also like maybe it is. I don't really know. They didn't really tell me how to deal with this in the King's Guard. It's like, there's something, there's more, there's a non-zero amount of stuff happening in his one and only chapter, but it's not, it's close to zero. It's pretty close. There's not really a whole lot to go off of. Area Huta, it's kind of like high D. I would say that Area Huta himself is probably the most boring character. The only thing he has going for him is that Dorne is an interesting location. The story of Dorne is interesting. Dorne Martell is an interesting dude. And, a lot of what goes on in Dorne is told through his POV. So we kind of depend on him a lot as just sort of the watcher on the wall, the fly on the wall, so to speak. as far as like keeping up to date with what's going on there. And I find that's like something that George tends to rely on a lot. I didn't want to go as far as to say like broad strokes like as the story goes on, but like there are definitely instances where he really leans on the existence of a character that is not particularly interesting or important or memorable in any way, but is nonetheless at an important location so they can just be there and tell the audience what is happening and why it matters. You know, like you get that from Theon Greyjoy, you get that from Catelyn, you get that from Asha, you get that from Sansa and Arya, and even Bran to a lesser extent. He's kind of doing his own thing, but like you get so many of these characters, these POV characters, who their only purpose is to just whatever. It's not even so much exposit; it's sort of have like the story itself, the story exposit itself to you in a way. If that makes any sense, it's just there to keep you up to date on what's going on in the world, and they're not really there to do anything. And those are always like almost always the least interesting chapters in A Song of Ice and Fire, and when characters are just there for the sake of being there. You know, it's the best thing about Jamie chapters and Tyrion chapters and Jon chapters and why they're rated so highly is because things are happening. Like these people do things, they take actions, they make promises, they kill people, make they 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 shake up the political landscape with their actions, and the things that they do matter. They have consequences, and that's a big part of why they're so engaging. And a lot of these characters just don't have that going for them, and some of them it's not their fault. Highlighting these two characters, but other times it's kind of like this character just didn't need to be here. You know, like would we really be at a huge loss if Arya Hotah was not a character? You know, if Ares Oakheart wasn't a character, like would we really be at that much of a loss if they were removed? Not really. Oh, Quentin Martell. Quentin Martell is okay. Um, put him like up here. No, not there. Up here, just ahead of Cersei, I think. You know, there is some value to the idea that he's like, you know, he has that sort of like weird perversion of like the hero's story going on, where instead of this like grand adventure full of like mystery and magic and heroism, no, most of his story is kind of like just kind of boring or shitty or miserable. You know, all of like his favorite, all of his friends die early on in the journey, and you know, no one really treats him with any respect. He never really gets anywhere, or accomplishes anything. You know, he's not handsome or charming or brave. You know, and even like when he does participate in fighting, it's kind of like in this weirdly like morally ambiguous war where he's like killing like child soldiers. And it's like, yeah, it's like, wow, the noble hero is killing children in a war that has nothing to do with him or his political interests. It's like very much like the opposite of what you would expect from like a heroic fable, and it's all done intentionally, of course, because like that's the whole point of his character, to show you that life is not a fairy tale. It's not a song, and sometimes you're you know a lot of you know, most you are not the protagonist of your story or anyone's story. You're just another guy in the world, and if you do some dumb stuff and you take risks that don't need to be taken, sometimes you're just gonna fucking die. And that's exactly what happened to Quentin Martell. He gets roasted alive, and what is probably like the most like darkly humorous or like just anti joke of the whole series is when he's being melted by one of the dragons, and he just goes, "Oh," and then he just fucking dies. It's really it's a weirdly funny moment, um, even though it's like kind of horrific at the same time. Um, yeah, like I said, he doesn't. He's another one of those characters that doesn't really do anything. That's not really true. I mean, he lets the dragons out, which is kind of a big deal. That's kind of a big deal. That kind of matters a little bit. It's probably gonna matter a lot in the next book, if I had to guess. Again, we don't really know because the book hasn't come out yet. But yeah, aside from that one thing at the very end, not really a whole lot going on with him. Um, Barristan Selmy. Who doesn't love Barristan Selmy? Barristan Selmy is a cool dude. Just a straight up Chad badass knight, you know. And I love this artwork of him too. This particular drawing of like the long white hair and the long beard. He's like half fantasy knight, half like sensei, all badass warrior. I love Barristan. You know, he can be a little dumb sometimes, but overall, he's just an upstanding, straightforward guy. You know, there's no room for fucking around with Barristan Selmy. He's just, he's just wants to cut to the chase essentially. Just, um, the whole. It's almost like borderline frustrating, with like, the way he's like, dealing with like the his star like suspicion. It's like, on one hand, it's like you kind of have to build up the suspension of, or the what's it called, the plausible deniability that Hizdar might not be the harpy, while at the same time he kind of got to push him towards being suspicious of the harp of Hizdar being the son of the harpy, or the harpy rather. And it's kind of like, on one hand, it's frustrating how long it takes for him to be suspicious of what is, without argument, the most suspicious person in Marine at the time that he dies, or not the time he arrests Hizdar. At the same, while simultaneously, it's like, the fact that like it's probably not him, like you kind of get the back in the idea in the back of your head is just like, it's so obviously him that because of that it can't be him. So it's kind of like, on one hand, that it's simultaneously frustrating that it takes so long for him to be suspicious, because it kind of makes him seem really dumb. And at the same time, it's like you can't just have him immediately yoink Hizdar, because it's like, well, that really telegraphs how much it totally isn't him, because why would it be that obvious? It's a weird tug of war, and it's kind of an awkward part of his story. The best part of Barristan Selmy's story by far is, him reminiscing about like how things have changed in the world of knighthood and the Kingsguard, and all these like regrets and thoughts that he has about Rhaegar and the Mad King and Duskendale, and all those important formative memories of his. That's all the really good stuff, and it really adds a layer of like complexity and interest to what should be a straightforward, like, wise older sensei character who's just there to, just be a guiding hand and, you know, do his duty and all that. It adds a layer of complexity that you may not have like gleamed initially just by reading about him from other people's POV. So yeah, definitely the best stuff from him is the introspective stuff. The whole bit about Hizdar is kind of like, it's iffy. It's not particularly exciting. Jonathan Connaughton, John Connington, Griff, as he is known. Looking straight up like a One Piece character with this particular art style. How do I rate John Connington? I don't really have much to say about John Connington. He's not like the most interesting dude ever. The Golden Company story is a really interesting story. I really feel like this is another one of those characters that's just like, it's a Dance of Dragons character that's probably going to become way more interesting when the next books come out, books come out. But right now he just really hasn't really got a lot going on for him. We've only had a few chapters of him, and so far all he's done is have like the most anticlimactic battle in the world, taking back his own castle, and that's pretty much it. Like there's really not, like it's probably like the character I have the least to say about. He's just there's just nothing going on in his world. I probably put him like C about there-ish, probably just ahead of Victorian Greyjoy. Look at that, just whatever. He's a very whatever character. Very, like I said, he'll probably be way more interesting later on, but right now it's just kind of like whatever. Melisandre, another one-off POV character. Definitely an interesting one-off POV character. Probably like the most like interesting one-off. Um, you get the whole bit about like this whole you sort of get like an insight of like as to how like much doubt she has, and how much she's like really has no idea what she's doing, and she's kind of like just bullshitting her way through it, and how a lot of her spells, quote unquote, are actually just her throwing like various colored magic powder, or not even magic, just like various powders and fire to like make them change color, which is like a normal chemistry thing that you can actually do in real life. And it's like not, there's a lot of bullshit and theatrics going on with Melisandre, but there's also like some really like crazy like deep lore shit going on too. Like she has this like one line of dialogue where it's strongly suggested that she doesn't eat food because she doesn't have to, because like her god feeds her like through magic telepathy, and it's kind of like fucking what, how does that fucking work? um but yeah, it's like there's some interesting stuff going on here. Again, one of these characters will probably be more interesting later on, not particularly compelling at this time. Ahead of John Con, I think, just barely, just for that one line alone. I was like, okay. But again, pretty low down there. Aaron Greyjoy could be an S tier if we were including the Forsaken chapter, but we are not including the Forsaken chapter. We are only going off of everything he has up to his last appearance, which is he not? I don't know if he. I guess he appears in. I guess he's in Feast for Crows. What are his chapters? I don't even remember where they show up. But he's only got a few of them, not including the Winds of Winter. And again, I love the Greyjoys. I love the Iron Islands and the Iron Islands culture. And Aaron is very much like the number one like insight into the inner workings of the political and cultural machinations of the Iron Islands and the Drowned God religion. So that's all super compelling and interesting. I like that shit a lot. The King's Moot is a great chapter, probably one of the best chapters in like the whole series. I would say, like, just all the lords coming in and starting their stuff and being like, hey, look at all this shit that I stole. Aren't I fucking awesome? I should be the king. And then Asha comes in and she's like, maybe we shouldn't do that because that sucks, and every time we do that, people die for no reason and we get nothing accomplished. And she almost wins. She almost pulls it out. And then Euron shows up and fucks everything. He's got that dragon horn. He's got the Valyrian steel armor. He says, I'm going to give you all of Westeros. And, the Iron Islanders, the Iron Islanders, the Ironborn, they're kind of dumb. They go along with it, and it's just sort of like, and they make him king. And, like, just the horror that you get through Aaron of the idea of, like, he was so convinced that Euron would never have a chance of being the king, that when it finally happens, is like, he literally questions his religion. Like, is this all a sham? Like, is like, is the Drowned God bullshitting me? Like, how the fuck did that happen? And if we were including the Forsaken, probably would be like right up there. Like, we're talking high A, S tier kind of thing. Based solely on what we have of him so far, and there's not much to it, I put him over Asha. Ooh, maybe even over Daenerys, honestly. Ooh. Am I like that one guy? Am I gonna be like the guy that puts Aaron Greyjoy over Daenerys Targaryen? Am I gonna be known as that guy on the internet from now on? Oh God. Fuck. I think I am. I'm doing it. I'm committing. Fuck it. Burn me. Burn me. Drown me. I don't care. Whatever you gotta do. My dog's leaving. It's over. Um. So yeah, I think that's everyone. I think I'm pretty happy with this placement. I think that's pretty fair. It's nice and symmetrical. Very pleasing to the eye. Um. I feel pretty strongly about these positions. Jon Snow is like borderline. Like I could maybe swap these two around because I kind of like Samwell Charlie more than Jon Snow. I just think that Jon Snow's story is more interesting than Sam's story because Sam hasn't really gotten the chance to like do his thing yet. You know, he's still kind of budding as a POV character, versus Jon is a very mature story. And plus, I mean, how do you get over that last scene where he fucking gets stabbed to death by the Night's Watch? I mean, that that'll hook you. I mean, if you're not ready for the Winds of Winter for that alone, I mean, I don't know what's wrong with you. Uh, but yeah, I'm. Those are pretty close to interchangeable to me. And yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with this. That took me almost 2 hours to do. That I really thought that would take me like 30 minutes. Just goes to show what happens when you don't prepare and you just ramble for 2 hours. But nevertheless, that is going to be where I leave it. So if you like this video, well, I mean, you already know what to do. There's this thing. It's do that, or there's a button, the red one. You click it, it turns white. It's wild. It's magic, like Melisandre, except less cool. You could do either of those if you really want. I don't expect you to because I have no idea how much of this I'm gonna be putting out. I just yeah, if you disagree or you have something to say about my perspectives on these various listings, let me know. Tell me in a comment. I like engagement. Talking is fun. Not when you do it for 2 hours. Talking about yourself for 2 hours straight is it's not fun. It sucks actually. As my throat will attest. But yeah, that's it for now. So I'll see you around, I guess. Bye.